What's good, friends list, episode 100 of the Game Pass Gamecast coming at you. For 100 straight weeks, we've been lucky enough to come through your speakers and talk all about the nerdy Xbox games and news we all just love so much. So, we figured we'd have to do something special for the big milestone, right? And obviously, what could be more special than an episode centered and dedicated around one of our favorite games of all time? That's right, The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. So, this week, the original trio circles up to talk all about the magical land of Cyrodiil and why Bethesda's 2006 high fantasy RPG has really stayed so important to us over the years. Why do some consider it the black sheep of the series, although it's held so highly amongst critics and fans alike? Does the beloved Dark Brotherhood questline still hold up in the current gaming landscape? And, of course, what can The Elder Scrolls VI take from the fourth entry as it inevitably ramps up its own development? We cover this and oh so much more on the newest jam-packed episode of the Game Pass Gamecast.
Now the fun begins.
Budget.
Stop! You violated the law.
Welcome back to another episode of the Game Pass Gamecast, your weekly go-to podcast for all things Xbox Game Pass, and PC gaming, including news, rumors, and conversation around them damn good video games. You can catch new episodes of the show when they drop each and every Friday morning on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and all other major podcast services. So, be sure to subscribe to us, rate us, review us, all that jazz, the whole rigmarole I tell you every single week. All of that. And follow us on Twitter at GPGC Podcast to stay up to date with everything regarding the show, video games like, and our dope giveaways. And realistically, though, I said welcome back to another episode, but this isn't just any episode. This is episode 100 of the Game Pass Gamecast. 100 straight weeks in a row, we've been coming in and, getting up in them eardrums, Anyways, but yes, episode 100, it's a special one this week because we got the whole crew here this week. Of course, joining me as always, well, I guess I should say, I'm your host as always, Travis Wade, aka Travis on most internet platforms. Joining me as always, my partner in crime, Mike Peapack, and also joining us, back in action, back in the saddle, cradle to the grave, DMX and please. Jet Li, baby, Adam Marshy Marsh, the trifecta is back.
Good to be back in the studio.
It's been a long time coming.
It's been a
I
while.
couldn't refuse when you told me what the number of this episode was and the topic was going to be.
Well, of course, and I guess I should preface that this is going to be a very OG episode of the Game Pass Gamecast. The past. I'd say over the past year or so, the show's kind of evolved into more of a topical news show than focusing just on Game Pass. And, we've obviously found success with that because we've been staying with that format for a while. But I think we all kind of agreed that episode 101, we had to do something special, obviously. But I think we all kind of agreed it was time to really, kind of dig back in and pull something special out. And that something special is, of course, Oblivion. The Elder Scrolls Oblivion. That's right. That's going to be our topic of the show this week. We've been talking about doing this forever. Now's the time to do it. I think everyone thought that, yeah, fuck it. Let's if we're gonna do it big, fuck it. We'll do it live. We'll do it big. We'll get after it. And while I'm at it too, before we get into it, it's episode 100. So got to open up a little bit of Grandpa's old cough medicine here.
A little bit of the bubbly.
A little bit of the bubbly to celebrate. It's 6:30 here. I think that's justifiable. Only a glass or so, but it's a special occasion. Got to bust out the good old Irish whiskey for that. But
Sounds like a quitter's mentality to only have a glass or two, but that's just me.
You know what? I am. I'm not going to argue with that. It is a Tuesday. Anyways, though, Adam. I talk to Mike every single week. Fuck him. I hear from him all the time. Fuck him. I want to, before we get into the show, catch me up. Normally I say, what's good, what's going on, what have you been playing? So, and you already know that, but catch me up. What have you been playing recently kind of catch everyone up. It's been a while since we kind of checked in with you. And I think a lot of people, since you always kind of were our, Mike kind of focused a lot on live service esports titles, things like that. You were always kind of in my wheelhouse in terms of you played a lot of different things. And also, too, you played a lot of indie games. Games that should be put on people's radars that aren't really, haven't gotten that attention that they probably deserve. So what have you been playing, Adam, before we kind of get into the meat of the show?
Might be some surprise. Recently, I've picked up 2 very little-known indie titles. You may have never heard of them. One is called Resident Evil Village, and the other is Death Stranding.
I'm trying to think, who made that? Norm Macdonald? I think of Norm Macdonald.
Norm something, Norman whatever.
That's right, Kojima. That's what I'm thinking of. I get them confused all the time.
So yeah, I've been playing a bit of those on and off. I will probably finish Resident Evil Village sooner than Death Stranding.
Oh yeah, as somebody who's played Death Stranding and actually is getting the itch since you started playing it, getting that itch to jump back in and replay it. It's at least a 50-hour commitment. So
yeah,
you're gonna be sitting with that one for a little bit.
Yeah, bit of that. And I also just started going through a bunch of the old RTS games I have. So it started with They Are Billions, which is an indie RTS where you play asymmetrically against humongous zombie hordes. It's a little bit rough around the edges, but it's still pretty fun. And then after playing some Day of Defeat with you guys,
yeah, buddy,
I fired up Company of Heroes 1 and 2, played through KO2's Soviet campaign for the first time, all the way through, all 14 missions, and that was a lot of fun. So
you've been in a little bit of everything. So since we kind of had our spoiler-free review a couple of weeks ago, what so far, I guess, since you're still kind of chewing away at it a little bit, what are your thoughts on RE8? As somebody who, like us, we all played RE7 together, we played in VR, it's a modern horror game I think we all really adored for the most part, and a game that, obviously RE8 we were all pretty excited about. What are your top level thoughts on it so far? Just, like I said, before we get into the big topic, I want to catch people up on you and what's going on since you're kind of always in our wheelhouse and part of the show. So what are your thoughts on RE8? Kind of top level.
I've been enjoying it a lot. I like all of the kind of atmosphere and puzzle solving. I like a lot of the stuff that you do during the low and quiet moments of the game. Reminds me a lot of Resident Evil 4, although that game had kind of a higher tension throughout the whole thing.
It was much more bombastic too.
Yeah, they share a similar aesthetic though.
No, definitely.
So I've been enjoying that. As far as the scares and the action, there's nothing in there that I can really be too mad about, but I'm also not blown away. It's nothing earth-shattering, but it's at least it's pulling me along. I'm interested.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those games that it's surprised. I actually, and we kind of talked about this before, it made me happy realizing when you got through 1/4 of the game, you probably didn't know if you were even if you were in tune and you watched all the trailers, everything like that. Just from my playstyle and how I like games and really media in general, with how much the marketing cycles are emphasized anymore and how much you're shown, I was very happy that 1/4 of the way through the game, I knew nothing of what was going to happen next. So in terms of that, I was very happy with that. But like you're saying, there's nothing really that I was ever too mad about. There were a couple areas that were a little long in the tooth. And Mike and I, kind of both came to agreement once he got to this specific area that I'm talking about. I definitely still don't think it's way too early to talk spoilers on this game. But, when you get to that certain area, you could tell it's a little long. But outside of that, it wasn't really anything I could harp on too much. It felt very much like a very much an evolution of what RE4 could be, in terms of if it was taking, if we were meshing RE4 with the new modern first-person aesthetic of Resident Evil and, thematically it fit in. I think this is a good modern spiritual successor to that to a degree. But it seems like you're enjoying your time. Everyone who I've talked to really seemed to enjoy it. Even some of the hardcore RE fans who, did have their gripes with it still said, hey, this stands up. This is a great game. This isn't.
It feels like one of those games that, and I apologize for interrupting,
No.
but to Adam's comments and just everyone that I think is a little bit critical of the game, you're absolutely right to be critical of it. It's not perfect, but I feel like the pacing is a bit of an issue with RE8. And if there's one thing that I wish it was done a little bit better, is just that, the pacing. Like you said, there's some parts of the game, the Castle Dimitrescu, obviously a huge focus of the game, spectacular, stellar, good stuff there. And then the middle section is just like boom, 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 boom. Like not to spoil too much, but you go through a couple other houses or whatever, and it's like two of them are just like done and dusted, and then you get to the final part, if you will, and I'm going to use air quotes on that and just kind of leave it vague at that, and then it's another very long section where I felt like the two sections that were just kind of brushed over really quickly could have really been focused on just a little bit more. And obviously I wasn't in the war room to see what was going on with the development. Maybe they were getting under duress. Maybe they were running out of time. But I would have really enjoyed the one part, especially probably the scariest part in the game, to just be a bit long, to just have a bit more life to it. I feel like they really could have pushed that a little bit more, because the game overall, everyone's kind of had the same sentiment of it lacking that horror feel that RE7 had, which is fine. I felt like they could have really honed in on those two sections. I felt like they maybe deserved a little bit more life than what they got, but it is what it is. And as Adam said, it's an enjoyable game. And as you said, it's an enjoyable game, but it's not one that's like, I'm not burning, like, I like it a lot. I'm a big fan of Resident Evil. I feel like 4, 7, and 8 are like my top 3, with RE2 remastered being in there. But like you guys have kind of said, that's whenever we say, or whenever you guys say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it feels like the pacing was a little off. That is in particular what you're talking about. Like the fact that there are some parts of the game that felt like it drags on a little bit, and then there are other parts that it's just like, oh my God, you blink and it's over,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's, I think you and I both kind of talked about this before, just because, you got further into the game and we were able to talk about a lot more things. But yes, the specific part that you're talking about, when it was over, I looked at my fiance, who she is my RE buddy when it comes to playing these games. We were both like, God damn it, I wish that would have been like another hour. Like that could have easily went on even more, because that was actually legitimately like frightening, like it was unsettling. And that was, that's probably the biggest thing, where you could tell this game is much more action oriented comparative to RE7, where you are much more hopeless. You are much more limited on, the amount of ammo you find, even at higher difficulties. So it's, at the same time, there's nothing wrong with that, because I think that opens up the series to more people, but it clearly was going for an RE4 aesthetic. RE7 was trying to, I think, play it a little safer, go back to its roots a little bit more, but obviously modernize it in, the growing popularity of first-person survival horror games. And I think RE4 being such a beloved title and beloved, step in the right direction, evolution for RE that kind of mixed survival horror and action so well. I think this is kind of, like I said, more of a spiritual successor to that. And it feels very at home being talked about with that. I adored the game. I thought it was great. I had my gripes, but, it is what it is. But we're not talking about RE8. We already talked about RE8. We'll eventually do a spoiler cast, too. I want to get a couple more people kind of through the game and then bring a couple more people and have a roundtable on that. But we're not talking about RE8 today. We're talking about Oblivion. The Elder Scrolls for Oblivion.
I have a grin that is so big on my face. If we were recording, you would be able to see white teeth.
I mean, it is easily, I feel very safe. A game that is very near and dear to all of us. We talk about it. It's brought up on the show probably at least once a week. I feel very safe in saying it's very close to at least once a week it's brought up. And it's a game that I think we harken back to a lot when we talk about modern RPGs and really modern, even adventure games in general. That I think we find a lot of inspiration from in the different interests we have with gaming, and especially open world adventure RPG games. And obviously, we're all fans of the Elder Scrolls, Bethesda, even Fallout, talking on Bethesda on a broader scope. But I think this is such a game that, I don't want to say doesn't get enough love, but, and we're going to kind of talk about this as we get into, some of the discussion prompts that I kind of want to go over and topics and things like that. But very much a black sheep whenever you think about the Elder Scrolls in general. We're talking Morrowind being the real, first big hit because it modernized the, traditional PC RPG experience on console and was the first to bring it to console and make it work and make it very easy for someone to pick up and play comparative to, other tries before that. And Skyrim obviously being the, cultural phenomenon that it was and still is. Obviously, there's 65 billion ports of that game, and it keeps selling. But, that being kind of the gateway RPG for many people now, but being very peeled back comparative to, Morrowind and even Oblivion. But Oblivion rarely seems to be mentioned. So maybe it's because of that I always want to bring it up and talk about it, because it's like, I kind of make fun of my fiance whenever she has this book that she loves. It's called Where the Crawdads Sing. I think that's what it's called. But she talks about it like it's the Holy Bible, where she'll bring it up and like talk about like she's obsessed with it. Like, oh, you got to play this game. You got to play this game. Anytime somebody talks about RPGs or anything like that, like I recommend this game. Like this is my version of that, where it's like I have so many fond memories and, I'm sure nostalgia to a degree attached to it, but I think this game holds up so well because I keep finding ways to come back to it and play it differently each time I play it. And I think that's not necessarily easy to say about, some modern open world RPGs, especially, first person immersive like this is trying to go for. So if you're new to the show, this is going to be, like I said, a very OG original Game Pass Gamecast show, where we kind of set the stage with the game, talk about, give you the background of it. We're not going to do, patch it, smash it, cash it, anything like that, because we're all going to say, yes, buy this game. Like, I feel very confident in saying that.
Imagine we've all changed our
Adam's going to be
sentiment.
like, JK, Acid Man. I came on anarchy, overthrow. But, that's obviously, I think, pretty redundant to do that. So I think this is going to be more authentic to us, and yeah, it may be a trip of nostalgia, it may be, discussing what makes this game special, but, I think it's such a great topic to talk about because I think it gives us, or you, the listener, I guess, more of a full picture on us and why we love this game so much, why it keeps coming up, but also too, if you're a new listener, kind of give you an idea of, how we've come full circle with the show and how it's evolved, but how it still, really does have its roots. So today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be talking about The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion is an open-world action role-playing video game developed by Bethesda Game Studios and published by Bethesda Softworks and Take-Two Interactive's division 2K Games, which a lot of people forget about. It's the fourth installment in the Elder Scrolls action franchise, fantasy series, following 2002's Elder Scrolls III Morrowind, and which released for Microsoft Windows and Xbox 360 in March of 2006. And on PlayStation 3 in March of 2007, with a mobile version of the game released on May 2nd, 2006, which I vaguely remember. They also tried doing a PSP version of the game. I was real pissed when that didn't come out, because that was like, just the thought of actually taking a mobile version of this game. I was like, I'm just not going to attempt to talk to women ever. Like, what's the fucking point now? Taking place within the fictional province of Cyrodiil, Oblivion's main story revolves around the player character's efforts to thwart a fanatical cult known as the Mythic Dawn that plans to open portal gates to a demonic realm known as Oblivion. The game continues the open world tradition of its predecessors by allowing the player to travel anywhere in the game world at any time and to ignore or postpone the main storyline indefinitely. A perpetual objective for players is to improve their character skills, which are numerical representations of certain abilities. Early in the game, 7 skills are selected by the player as major skills for the character, with those remaining termed as minor skills. Development for Oblivion began in 2002, directly after the release of Morrowind, opting for tighter pacing in gameplay and greater plot focus than in past titles. To design the graphics, Bethesda used an improved Havoc's physics engine, high dynamic range lighting, procedural content generation tools that allowed developers to quickly create detailed terrains, and the Radiant AI system, which enabled non-playable characters, NPCs, if you ain't a nerd like us, to make choices and engage in behaviors more complex than in past titles. The game features fully voiced NPCs, a first for the series, and the music of award-winning composer Jeremy Soule. Upon release, Oblivion was well received by critics and has won a number of industry and publication awards. It was praised for its impressive graphics, expansive game world, and schedule-driven NPCs, and is now considered one of the greatest games ever made. You love to see it, just love it. It was successful both commercially and critically. Following a number of smaller content releases, Bethesda released 2 expansion packs for the game, Knights of the Nine and Shivering Isles, which were bundled with the Elder Scrolls Oblivion Game of the Year Edition, which released in 2007 and later re-released as a 5th anniversary edition in 2011. Also released in 2011 was the game's successor, The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, set 200 years after Oblivion. So, kind of setting the stage if you're new to the show, if you're new to the game, because a lot of people are, surprisingly. So, kind of kicking it off, guys. More so top level with this, though, because I want to kind of get just everybody's, what's the word I want? Like, history, or more so, personal feeling with this game, kind of at a top level. But Oblivion, to me, really has kind of always felt like one of these games that has a story connected to it, or a memory that is really intrinsically tied to your love of games. At least I like to think so with a lot of people that I've talked to and different things like that. For example, I feel that way about Ocarina of Time, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, one of my favorite games of all time, one of the greatest games of all time, fight me, where I remember exactly where, when, how I got that game as a kid, and I remember how, the feeling of first stepping out into Hyrule Field felt. Like, I vividly remember that and thinking, wow, this is unbelievable. Like, this is where video games are going as a 5-year-old kid or whatever. Oblivion, at least to me, has that same pool, where I remember exactly what I was doing the first time I played it, and shocker, Mike, I think, is going to tell the same exact story, and how what I experienced with it was so one of a kind. So, guys, I want to kind of kick it off, and I want to start with Adam, because I know Mike's story probably that he's going to tell, but Adam, what is your story with Oblivion? What's your Oblivion story? What about this game really stood out the first time you played it, and why did you feel something so different with it when, compared to other games of a similar genre at that time? Because you always play a lot of PC games. So, what about this game stood out, and really what's your connection with Oblivion?
Well, it starts before I even played it for the first time. I had obviously played Morrowind before Oblivion, and I remember a friend of mine got a hold of the game and told me about his first couple of hours with it. And he didn't have a really high opinion of it. He said something like, yeah, there's a tutorial and then you go through the sewers, but once you get out into the main game, he said, like, the next objective was so far away and I walked there and it took me 3 hours. I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. And apparently he, died to a mud crab or something on the way there, and his progress got reset all the way back to being just outside the sewers.
Hey, listen, it's okay. We cut ties with a lot of people in our lives.
And I think he didn't. I think he was not aware that you could fast. In fact, I believe he was claiming that it was not possible to fast travel to Wayne and Priory as soon as you start the game and get out of the sewers, which is not true. You can.
You very much can.
And to me, I was just like, wow, really? Like, at first, the impression he gave me, because I believed him, was like, that's kind of disappointing. There's and the whole game is just like a big open field. Like, what are you talking about? This doesn't sound that interesting. And then when I finally actually got to play it, I think I played it alongside Mike here for the first time. I was so relieved to see that it was actually really good. And the persistent memory for me with Oblivion is always going to be the side quests, because let's be honest, Oblivion is not winning any awards for its dungeon design, because most of them are just kind of
carbon copy,
made of the same prefabbed parts.
Not carbon copy, but very much they have this intrinsically the same DNA between them.
Yeah, they're all brushed out with 2, maybe 3 different palettes, and they'll
Mhm.
just have slightly different layouts. So dungeon design is not winning any awards. The main quest line is pretty good, I will say. I think it does a better job of like stringing you along and keeping you interested than I at least felt at first with
Mhm.
Morrowind
What
and
I always
Skyrim.
thought, to not interrupt you, but just kind of
Go ahead.
pulling on that thread a little bit, with the main story and quest line, I always appreciated that you weren't the chosen one in this game. You weren't necessarily, like in most RPGs, especially fantasy RPGs, and really any video game. You are the hero. You are the central being in this. You are the almighty. You are the one whose story revolves around. And really, in this game, you aren't. You are, yeah, you're a catalyst for that, but you're not necessarily, the story doesn't necessarily evolve around you. It revolves around Martin. Martin is the key to all of this. He's the one who's supposed to, bring balance to the world and, close the gates of Oblivion and whatnot. But you're not necessarily, like, at most, you're the hero of Kvatch. And that's about it. You just happen to be in the right place, right time, and can be drawn in because of, the Emperor being able to, you just happen to be there and be in his dream and see that as a sign that you get pulled into it. I just always thought that was so refreshing. Like, looking back on it now, compared to so many games, Skyrim, even Morrowind too, like, you look at that and the plot is driven around you. You're the Dragonborn. You are the one who's going to solve everyone's problems and, bring balance to the world.
one.
Yeah, you are the chosen
Mhm.
one. And in this game, you're kind of the chosen one, but you're not the protagonist in this necessarily. You're more the catalyst, but not, you're more of, pushing things along, but you're not the focal point.
Yeah, you're more likely to be lost to history as a figure, like
Mhm.
forgotten about in history books. So yeah, I tend to agree. I think it's a cool role to put the player in, to just kind of have them like driving events, at least in the main plot, mostly from the background and being a servant to the more quote unquote important characters. Definitely something different for the series. I agree. It's a cool touch.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Mike, kicking it to you, man. What is your? I mean, I feel very confident knowing what your initial first, experiences were with Oblivion and whatnot because we share them. But tell me kind of what your overall thoughts are right off the bat with the game. What story kind of connects you with the game, and really what kind of first drew you in, I guess, to why you think this game's special right off the bat.
Yeah, I think, what comes to mind first when I think about Elder Scrolls Oblivion, me and Adam spent a fair amount of time on the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind on the original Xbox, and it was something that we both enjoyed thoroughly. I feel pretty safe in assuming that for the two of us and sharing that for the two of us. And I feel like it was a game in Morrowind that we could really... It was like the first game I felt like since Ocarina of Time. I'll keep it to console games because Diablo 2 was another one. But it feels like one of those games where I could really just enjoy the RPG elements of it. I've been a person that pretty much all my life, even since I was a little kid, I used to play Rogue Spear and CS on my old computer. I've always been into shooters. I've always genuinely enjoyed shooters. And then I have dabbled in other game modes, game types too, RPGs, things of that nature, and I've enjoyed them greatly. But to me, the Elder Scrolls Morrowind got me. It might have been the first game that I really felt that immersion. And Oblivion, when I heard that it was coming out, and I knew what it was, I knew it was the follow up to Morrowind. Like, I knew it was the next game in line. It was a game that I knew I had to have like pretty much right away as soon as I found out about it, because back then we were just little kids. I wasn't in touch with gaming as much as I am now, for the most part. And I basically was at the mercy of my parents or my brother, who would take me to get games sometimes, or I would play his games. And
yeah, that was always the catalyst for you. You had the older brother who was, John's 8 years older than you?
Yes.
Just about, yeah. So, like, you had that catalyst of, like, oh, he's in tune with what's going on, because he can go and, at that point, probably he's working part-time or whatever. He can go and afford these games and stuff, and, like, you could then be like, you had that pool of somebody who was in the know that you can say, oh, like I got to play all these different games because he was playing these games where, some other kids might not have. Like me, I was more focused on my cousin. If he had it, like that was cool because he was a couple years older than me. Like I could see that, like, oh man, he has that game. And also too, he was able to afford that compared to my parents who weren't necessarily like got a couple games throughout the year and that was about it, middle class and whatnot. But like we were kind of at the mercy of, unless you had the big brother or an older cousin or something like that, the internet wasn't necessarily this bursting, bubbling pot yet that it is now, where it's just so intrinsically tied to everything we do, where we can get any info and we know games now at this point, there's rumor mills and whatnot. Forums weren't necessarily as popular as they were, and I say forums now, it's mostly Reddit and things like that. But, even then in that point, we're talking, Morrowind-esque time, early 2000s, you don't necessarily have that. You don't know of that yet. You got to go to a game store and you see either a promotional sign or, if you're lucky, maybe a commercial or something like that, or in an EGM or something like that, or official Xbox magazine or something, so, I always thought it was like, I would look to you for what games were cool because you had the older brother who was able to kind of pull on that to like know what was hot in the streets at that time.
Yeah, it was always like, that was a big part of my exposure to a lot of games, right? Like he was basically the reason why I played a lot of the games that I played growing up. Like Mortal Kombat's one that was just like, I had it because of him, or I was able to play it because of him rather, because it was like one of those things that kids our age just didn't have because they didn't have an older brother. And it was like to the situation where I feel like my parents were kind of in this situation where it's like, well, if one of them plays it, it's probably not fair that the other plays. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Like that type of thing. So to me, I was extremely lucky and I'm extremely thankful that I was able to experience games thanks to my older brother. And it was mainly my older brother having a vehicle and a method of transportation to go get the games, especially when he was older. But Oblivion and Morrowind was a game that kind of missed the mark with him. I feel like when it comes to my brother, he's never been one that by the time he really got into those games, he was already getting a little bit older, and I don't feel like he wanted to spend quite as much time just sinking into a game of that nature. And it's not because the game's not good or he didn't think it was good. It was simply just a time thing. It's like a time crunch, kind of like all adults have, like we have nowadays, where it's just sometimes you just don't have the time to do some of the stuff that you wanted to do anymore. You know what I mean? And for all that, when it all shakes down like this, I was just lucky that I was able to really get to experience a game because of it. So that's my kind of story of at least how I came across Oblivion. My first experience with Oblivion was obviously, you're going to tell that story, but I will say that the game was everything that I liked from Morrowind, which was the immersion aspect, the quests. You felt special and things of that nature, but it was a challenging game. You had to have wits, you had to use intelligence. It had all of the good stuff about Morrowind, I felt, in a more streamlined, more digestible way, a less of a time sink way. And the one thing that really changed the game for me was the fast travel mode, because in Morrowind, while I love the game, don't get me wrong, Morrowind pissed me off to no end because it's I have no fucking clue where I'm going and you are not giving me any fucking guidance. I don't and some people love that and more power to you. But me, I was someone who was I don't like not knowing anything about anything. I want to, I want to play
Plus
this
game. The limited depth of field that game offered because of the technical limitations didn't necessarily help its cause a little bit. It was the fog's out today.
Yeah.
It's out everywhere, damn it.
Exactly. But Oblivion, my first experience with it, and even though it was only on actually, it would have been on my brother's HD TV the first time we played it, which would have been the first HD TV I really had. And I remember it was just the feeling of seeing Cyrodiil in HD for the first time was just out of this world. Just incredible. And I really can't, overstate the fact at just how incredible it really was. It's just a feeling that I'll never forget, seeing Cyrodiil walking out of the sewers for the first time and looking up. And I think it was nighttime, or no, it was daytime. But the first time, like, walking out of the sewers is a big deal. But to me, the thing that really was like, holy smokes, was the first time that the night sky was out there. And I just remember thinking to myself, holy shit, like, look at all these stars, look at the galaxy, look at all this detail. And it's just something that in the older days, like, companies didn't have the resources and the systems didn't have the resources to transmute that type of experience. Those things were like, remember all the sports games back in the day? Like, all the fans were looked like cardboard cutout people.
Yeah.
And it's like, now all of a sudden these night stars and these constellations are out to play. Holy crap. And that's kind of what I thought about Oblivion. I thought it was visually just absolutely gorgeous. It sucked me right in pretty much right away from that point. And then also, like, the gameplay was just so, I felt like it was so clean at the time. I know other people might disagree with me. I know a lot of people complain about it in general for a lot of different reasons, but I truly thought that game was, probably one of the better games. In my opinion, it was one of the best experiences that I had ever had up until that point in time.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree with you. I mean, you got to think,
and still, like, not to cut you off again,
but go.
I still am not willing to admit, or I'm still willing to go out on a limb and say that, like, Elder Scrolls Oblivion is still probably the best experience I've ever had gaming. And I mean, you're talking about someone who was around for the height of Diablo 2, around for the height of StarCraft, the original StarCraft on Blizzard, on Battle.net, the beginning of Counter-Strike really coming to Steam for the first time. And this isn't me, like, flexing my muscles or trying to tout myself as, like, this resident expert in good games.
Get a load of this guy.
Like, quote, good games, quote. But, to me, it's like, I have been around the block for a lot of experiences, good and bad. MSN Gaming Zone, Rainbow Six Rogue Spear, Age of Empires on there. Like, you're talking some really nostalgia-heavy experiences. And I would put Oblivion right up there with all of them. And I mean, Diablo 2, especially when Lord of Destruction came out, is probably and then I go back and I think about Counter-Strike 1.6 and 1.5. Man, there has been some historic events in my life that I've gotten to enjoy. But Elder Scrolls Oblivion is pretty damn close to probably not the far and away favorite, but I would put it as my favorite. And I mean, I played Halo 2 in its prime online. I played Halo 3 in its prime. I mean, I've played some games. I've done a little bit of gaming in my life, and I'm not saying that anyone else is wrong for not feeling my way.
Just a little bit.
My personal opinion, and I'm not going to attack anyone else who doesn't feel this way, because you're more than welcome to have your own opinion. But for me, I've experienced a lot of games, man, but Oblivion was probably... It's probably the peak for me, to be honest.
Yeah, and I have a lot of nostalgic feelings like that. Like, when you're talking about, like, I was around in the height of, some of the bigger Nintendo titles that really hit off with single-player gaming, like, Ocarina of Time and Super Mario Brothers 64 and, stuff like that, and evolving into, I was there with the original Halo. I was there with Morrowind. I was there with these titles. I, too, played, Diablo back in the day, StarCraft. I remember the amount of times before I was allowed actually to get, like, my cousin burned me a copy of Diablo 1 and 2. Like, I remember putting tons of time into the, shareware version of Diablo, like, in StarCraft, too. Like, the amount of time I put into knowing how incredible these games are. But, I still look back in the same way that you do. Like, this game shaped so much of my how do I want to put this? The aspects of gaming that I hold dearly, and shaped so much of the quote-unquote gamer that I am today, and really shaped so many things of me that, and how I want to interpret, entertainment and media and certain things within this medium that, really stick out to me now. Like, it's got me into games that I probably wouldn't have tried, maybe before, like Kingdom Come Deliverance and things like that, that like it makes me want to try RPGs, on a whim at this point, and with no real, drive to do so. And it's all because really this game, like I was like you, I had the PC version of Morrowind, because I got an Xbox a little bit later, like mid, I think it was like 2004, 3, something like that. But I originally played Morrowind on PC. I got the PC version at like Walmart, I remember, and played the shit out of it. And I remember hearing like, oh, there's a sequel coming. There's a sequel. And like I said, when you're a kid, it's mostly, friends that you hear stuff from, or a cousin or something. Or if you're lucky enough, an EGM, or like I said, original Xbox magazine, or, what have you. That I remember hearing about this game and hearing about how grand this thing is. And, and not really understanding like how that worked necessarily at this time. And like, obviously looking back now, the system had its flaws and whatnot, but like the Radiant AI, and remember first hearing about that, they're like, oh, these NPCs that you play, not knowing what to call them at that point, I'm sure, but like these characters in these games, they have their own schedules that they're on. Like, if I go to a certain place, yeah, they may be there one day, but on this day they have this to do, and they're not there. They're off doing that, and you can go find them on that day, or at this time of the year, they're doing this. Like, that blew my mind in terms of what games could be, and specifically RPGs, because I loved really, and that was such at a prominent age, that Morrowind age, that I was really starting to find my love for fantasy and sci-fi and whatnot. And I remember my step-grandfather really getting me into the Lord of the Rings and things like that, that really kind of opened my eyes to, oh, this stuff is completely out of my wheelhouse, but I just want so much more of it, and to engulf anything that comes in that's remotely like that. So it really kind of hit for me at a prominent time of, the entertainment aspects and media aspects that I love, and really kind of shaped that. And, my story with getting into Oblivion and playing it for the first time, and it was, like you were starting to say, like, it was when your brother was home from college. It was that right when the game came out, or right around when it came out. And I remember that was when he first got his 360, and he brought it home from college, and he had hooked up, and he was going to be there for, a few months or whatever. So we instantly were like, yo, we got to go get this game. When you found out, you were like, yo, it's in, let's go. I remember your mom driving us out to GameStop to pick it up, getting a used copy of it, because I think that's all they had in was used copies. Driving back to your house, putting the game in, it not loading. And we were like, fuck. And looking at it, there's a big ass scratch down the middle of it. All right. And then going to your mom's.
Like the ring, like someone had the Xbox set up, like straight up and down.
And it got knocked.
Knocked it over.
Yeah. And I remember you being like, listen, Mom, we got to go back. This ain't working. And your mom being like, okay, all right. So driving back, luckily them having another used copy, and it working, getting it and taking it back to your house. And I will never forget sitting there watching and play. It's one of those memories that it's like, I can remember I can remember so many of these random things in my life, but I can't remember like what the fuck I ate for breakfast yesterday, or, type of thing, where I'll never forget like coming out of the Imperial sewers for the first time and coming into that world and being thrown into this lush, lifelike field. It wasn't, it was saturated, but it wasn't, it was a saturated that was what you would imagine, and rightfully so, because they talk about like, now that we have access to documentaries and things like that about, the inside baseball aspect of, game development and design and whatnot, and learning about, they used HDR in this. Like, there's a reason why that they went that route for that. And it was, a little more taxing on the system, but for what Cyrodiil was, that's what they wanted to portray. And going from that dank, gross sewer that you were in with, so many gray palettes and dark, grimy palettes within that, to lush green and bright blue and, so many different, God rays that you're seeing within that. Like, it's unbelievable. Like, I remember getting out of that sewer and being like, this is something that is going to change how games are made, or open world games, where it was that first time that you see, oh, look over there, that mountain, you could go to it. Like, you're probably not supposed to climb it, but you could technically climb it. Like, you just got to jump around a little bit, but you can climb up there if you want. Like, it's totally fine. And learning that, so many different aspects of the actions you do will raise your stats and different things like that. Like, even playing Morrowind, but Morrowind being so deep in the weeds of, what RPGs were, and being such a traditional RPG to a degree that it's much more, tabletop RPG in some aspects with how attacking works and things like that, where you look at Oblivion and it's night and day difference in a way, but still has that feel of, no, there's some strategy and some, number crunching that comes along with this on how you want to, develop this character that you have. But like you were saying, that first time too, going and fast traveling or getting to, the camps right outside of Kvatch, and it becoming night and it becoming dark because there was an Oblivion gate around, like seeing that transition to the night sky and that dark grind, like dark foreboding, like red and orange and black mixed in and brown mixed into the sky, and being that first time they really saw like HD graphics in something was just mind-blowing. And it's something that I can vividly remember seeing and just sitting there kind of in awe, like not like knowing this is big, but not really saying anything and just kind of soaking it in. That I remember us sitting there all day and playing it and instantly knowing, like, I need this game. Like, I know my computer ain't gonna fucking run it. I don't have a 360 yet, but I need this game. I need to figure out a way to get this game. And, luckily, a couple months later, getting a 360, and that was, like, one of the first games I instantly got. I was like, I just need that game. I need to play it. And throwing hundreds of hours into that game. It's just... And it's a game that I instantly can go back to at any point because of that. And it still kind of blows me away. But so, kind of like, not completely jumping ship to another point, but kind of moving the conversation a little bit forward on it. I don't want to dance around the subject too much, but, I think, like Adam said, one of the most beloved aspects of Oblivion are its quests, specifically its side quests. And sure, we hear a lot of praise about the Dark Brotherhood, and I do want to obviously talk about that in a little bit, but, but this was one of the first games where I actually truly felt the idea of, like I said, you see that mountain, yeah, you can go there. You can do whatever. This is open world at its finest. And you could actually find something. You just pick a direction you want to go in and just go there, and you're going to find something. It could be, the troll under the bridge that jumped off and killed itself, and there's a note there, like in the mystery surrounding that. Like, you will find things that are there, and it's one of those games that a lot of people, will say, like, oh, well, for its time, you look back, well, because of its time, but there was a lot of emptiness at times and whatnot. And, well, yeah, I'm sure there was technical limitations too, even though they had all of this extra power at the time thinking, but being that there were technical limitations, sure, there was some peeled backness to it, but even still, pick a direction, go in it, you're going to find something, and you're going to find something of meaning. So, Adam, kind of kicking it to you, but do you think this was one of the first games where you truly had that feeling of you can just go there and you can find something? What narratively, I guess, with the quest, with what you did in Oblivion, stood out to you?
I think the standout thing for me in the quests of Oblivion was... Are we talking about, like, overall or just the side quests?
Side quests obviously are the big thing that, a lot of people talk about. When they talk about Oblivion, they usually talk about its side quests, and that kind of being the first, especially on console, experience that you had with having depth to not just, oh, you see that? Go kill that. Okay, cool. Like, there was actually, like, it wasn't a one trick pony type of thing. There was, you're doing this, which leads to this, which then leads to this. And also you're going to have to do that after. Then you'll start to, come to a resolution with it. It was multi-factored. So I guess from that aspect, what kind of made that stand out to you?
I mean, just what you said, like, every quest I can remember from Oblivion, and maybe that's like selection bias based on what's memorable to me, but it felt like everything had a bit of an arc to it. Every quest was written to have an interesting hook. Like, there's something going on here that's like strange even for this fantasy world. Like a town full of invisible people and nobody knows why it happened, or a woman who's pet rats in her basement are being attacked,
My
and it's one of
rats!
her neighbors who is like sicking wild animals on them.
Dude, whenever you
Um,
see her creeping around in the back of her house in her yard, just like the Argonian, just I will fucking lose it every time I see her just back there. No, what? I'm not doing anything. No,
But
definitely.
yeah, it was just like every quest felt like it had something interesting to offer. Most of them had like twist endings too. Like
Mhm.
it felt like whatever the game was leading you to believe the conclusion would be, there would be some subversion or some twist on it that would turn the whole thing on its head and make you rethink everything that you just did.
Mhm. No, definitely. And I kind of felt that way with a lot of stuff that I did in that game in general and I think that's too, you could obviously see that they were going for more of not, I don't want to say a linear focus, but there was a little more linear focus than I would say Morrowind, but not as much obviously as Skyrim, which was a very much more linear title in my opinion, but it was more so, I want to say like cinematic, and more so the presentation was much more, you got more of a narrative experience out of it. I'm sure, voice acting and things like that played into it as well, but like you said, the narrative design for a lot of these quests, it seemed like the first time that was given a, hey, we now have a much broader fan base. We got to talk to a lot more people. What can we do to bring those in? And it's, hey, we could put more emphasis on being a more cinematic narrative approach to what people would expect from a narrative driven game. And I think really, as obviously at that point it's, even though it started in 2002, the game comes out in 06, it's we're starting to see much more emphasis put on, immersion into just films alone and books and things like that, where, now we're starting to see that really start to pop with video games. We've had multiple Metal Gear games at that time where you're taking a game you're taking a genre and making it much more than just, oh, you gotta hide from someone. No, there's this twisting, crazy plot. I mean, as crazy as it is, it was definitely took some thought to get into it, but it was much more cinematic than anything at that time. And, I started to feel so many different pools of that. You started to see so many more games come from that Metal Gear formula. And even then, I could feel inspirations from that narratively with RPGs and games like this that, this then started to feel like another catalyst for more so the RPG genre, obviously, but that feeling of there's depth to everything that goes on in here, specifically side quests and main quest line and whatnot. You were actually physically part of this much bigger story than just you. Mike, what about you?
I would say the biggest thing for me when it comes to I would say the quest line, narratively speaking, was like Adam did make some great points about like the twists and turns. It always felt like there was a lot of harkening back to Morrowind, which I really appreciated. Like Adam talked about the rat quest. Obviously the first Fighters Guild quest in Morrowind, you went and cleared rats out, and here you flip around in Oblivion, and like you guys said, they're actually the lady's pets.
Letting fucking cougars into her house.
I think to me, like, obviously we'll take the Dark Brotherhood situation out of it, per request, because I feel like that's kind of cherry picking.
We're gonna dive into that next. Don't worry, we're gonna get nice and deep into the Dark Brotherhood.
I would say my favorite part of the game, outside of basically, like, I think one of the most popular parts of the game was the arena, and I think one of the most underrated quests was the last final quest with the arena, when you go and you find out that the Grandmaster of the arena is actually part vampire. And it is sad that he just kind of shuts down unless you kill him, because he just doesn't want to live anymore.
Please, kill me, go.
yeah, but I think like going to the fort, fighting through all the people to get the journal, to find the story about the Grandmaster in the arena, was just a really, really interesting spin, and I had liked it a lot. And I do see that we're going to talk about DLCs later, but I would just love to go ahead and say that the Shivering Isles was just out of this world incredible DLC. It added so much depth and so much value to the game that, between the arena and between the Shivering Isles, I don't think you could go wrong with either one of those two for this question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head for me with the arena. I mean, and what's funny to think about and how different the game probably would have been, and if we would have seen as much emphasis put on the arena, was that the original idea, and really, if you watch, I believe it was a No Clips History of Bethesda documentary they did, or it might have been actually the Making of Oblivion documentary that came with the collector's edition of the game. You could find this on YouTube, both of those on YouTube. Highly recommend both of them, specifically the No Clip one. But I can't remember which one it was, but a couple of the development, some of the guys on the development team were talking about, well, in each city, we originally had planned to have an arena in each city, and each city have its own arena quest line, and then have them all tie back into one, and, have this overarching, hey, there's going to be, if you're the champion in this area, you're still going to have to work your way up on this end, but there's also going to be some changes if you go from there to another arena you're going to face more challenges, and you're going to face some more, there are different unique challenges, and it all ties back into, a much bigger conclusion at the end, for more of a grand champion feel. And it's crazy to think about how different that could have been, with how beloved the arena quest line is, and, really being a one and done thing outside of, obviously, the Elder Scrolls Arena back in the day, the original game that really kind of put that series on the map, and having that feel of having an arena and different things like that within that game. And the thought of actually the Elder Scrolls Arena having a game of that magnitude, and I have a feeling that potentially we could see that with the Elder Scrolls 6 leaning more into that, almost in a Breath of the Wild fashion, that it harkens back to such an origin of the game being able to pretty much go in any direction, and having that game be so procedurally generated and whatnot, that I could see Elder Scrolls 6 going in that direction with, if they do go to High Rock or, wherever. But to me, obviously outside of the Dark Brotherhood, but the arena was just such a standout thing, just thinking of, oh, you can go there. And you could also bet too. You could do different things. There was an economy in this game. There was different aspects that you just couldn't even, it at that age, thinking of what video games could be, that blew my mind. Not to mention the, adoring fan too. Everybody just loved the adoring fan. As one of the original memes of YouTube came out of this game. So, but yeah, man, I mean, you hitting on the arena, I wasn't even thinking about, oh fuck, the arena, man. When you think of all the quest lines, to me, that continually stands out, that I can go through that and do that 10 times, and it's still going to feel as rewarding each time. But all right, so let's not dance around anymore. Let's get into Dark Brotherhood. So the Dark Brotherhood questline is really, I think, always something that is brought up when discussing Oblivion, or even just Elder Scrolls in general, and obviously for good reason. I think there's a lot of fans and gamers at that time who were really able to recognize that not only was the presentation of this questline so unique and different from most other RPG open world games at that time, obviously being limited to the scope of what was available at that time, but still being so uniquely different. But it was really reflective of where the industry could be heading with a more cinematic approach that we kind of keep talking about. So, Adam, where do you think it stands in 2021 right now? This questline that so many people hear about, the Dark Brotherhood, and that was the reason why to play Oblivion, and how impressive that was. How do you think that stands up in kind of 2021, or I guess I should say, 10 plus years later from when we first, played the game, or last time we all played through it together, or whenever the last time you played it, how do you think it kind of stands up in modern gaming right now? Does the questline hold up as much as many remember, or is that kind of nostalgia goggles that were thrown over our face? They kind of fog up everything. What do you think?
If I were to go back and play it now, because it has been a while, I think it still would stand up, solely because it exemplifies all of the game's storytelling strengths. Like we've been talking about, almost every questline has a twist to it, and the Dark Brotherhood has probably one of the most prominent twists of any questline in the Elder Scrolls series. So going back to play it once you know what the twist is, and looking at what all the warning signs were, how they kind of tipped their hand and showed you like, hey, something might not exactly be as it seems. Like it was pretty well constructed. And if I think if you transplanted that whole quest line like whole cloth into a new game, nobody would be able to tell that it was from 15 years ago.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, it is interesting too, like you were saying, like once you go back and play through it again, like it is much clearer, like, oh, you could see that they were, not very like tongue-in-cheek referencing this or, showing their hand pretty well, but you are able to pick up on things that obviously seem much more clear that you're seeing, the second time around. But, it's like any good movie or whatever that you know there's this big twist that's coming at the end that, oh yeah, oh well, now looking at it, I could see that or see how they played out with that. But yeah, I agree. I think, obviously there's a reason why so many entries and things within the Elder Scrolls keep going back to that. Obviously, it's a, intrinsic part of the lore that is, the Elder Scrolls and what happens in Tamriel and whatnot, but there's a reason why they keep going back to that questline, why they have it in Skyrim to be able to go and do, that iteration 200 years later of the Dark Brotherhood, and why in the Elder Scrolls Online there were still aspects of the Dark Brotherhood. There are quest lines you can go and do that. There's a reason why, and because it's so beloved, and because people have so many, emotions tied to that, and seeing what you were able to do within a storyline like that was tied and taught in mystery, and a lot of people not even knowing, and just killing somebody for the first time, and then waking up the next or in the middle of the night with somebody standing over you and being like, what the fuck? Like, and not expecting that. So Mike, what about you? What with the Dark Brotherhood? Catch me up on what you where you stand right now with it. What do you think, where do you think it stands in 2021, or the last time you obviously played it within the past couple of years in modern gaming? Where do you think this quest line that's so beloved by so many people, and really the thing that so many people, I think, who played Oblivion and love Oblivion kind of point to as one of their reasons, where do you think it stands right now? And do you think it holds up as much?
Yeah, I'll just be honest. I think that the Dark Brotherhood was such a great introduction to the series. Like, I know that the Dark Brotherhood existed in Morrowind, but it wasn't something that you could really like join. It was kind of like you knew what it was, but you weren't like able to really take full advantage of it. And I felt like they did a really good job building the lore and creating an experience that, everyone kind of like, it was almost like the predecessor to the karma system. I almost feel like in Fallout in a way, because it was like, in Fallout, they did the karma system, and I thought the karma system was just, spectacular, to be honest. And while Oblivion didn't have, specifically just the perfect karma system, it was like you constantly had to fight this battle of like, okay, like, how do I feel about killing this person? And it starts like the beginning of the Dark Brotherhood starts with killing old Rufio with the Blade of Woe. And it like it's kind of memey, like if you think about it. Like, you go to this random inn and you talk to Rufio, and he's just like this kind of this like chud guy who's like nothing, not really notable, and he's just kind of like oblivious to the world. And then you kind of tell him, like, you kind of hint that like why you're there, and he's just like, oh no. Like, you just cuck him, and it is what it is.
Right.
But like, it starts off like this cheesy, Oblivion, down to its core is relatively cheesy, but it's like cheesy in all the right ways, in my opinion. Like, it's just so fun to do stuff like that, and it creates this moral dilemma within the player of like, do I really want to go through with killing this person? How bad is he really? And then you hear about all these bad things, and you're like, well, it is what it is. And then they kind of use this building of lore, and the story just gets more and more dramatic as you go through. And I feel like it kind of pushes you through to continue progressing through that storyline. Not that they really had to try hard, but like, if you were someone who felt a little weary about
killing people, murdering people for money, which, I think is a reasonable feeling to have, even though it's a video game. I was always someone who tried to abide by the rules in GTA and didn't want to be a total scumbag.
You didn't always want to cause a huge pile up. You're trying to stay, I'll stop at a stoplight every now and then.
I'm a bit of a chaotic good in life as it is, and it's just I try to do the right things, and that game definitely it does find a good way to make you feel like you're doing the right thing, even if you're murdering people for money. So, with all that being said,
you violated the law.
It's just the Dark Brotherhood took this really good opportunity of really capitalizing on the kind of the unknown nature of it. In Morrowind, you hear about it a little bit. You learn that it's this guild of assassins that are elite and things of that nature. And basically, to me in Morrowind, all the Dark Brotherhood was good for was giving me free gear that I could use until I was, outgrew it, could get better gear, and then you could sell it for a ton of money. And then, it kind of adapts to this monster of a storyline in Oblivion, and then even in Skyrim pushes it even further. Although I felt like the Skyrim version was a lot more dry and kind of meh. I will say that I genuinely loved the ending to the Skyrim. You are the listener, you are the listener. And then you just cuck him, and it's just okay. And it kind of harkens back to that cheese, Rufio murder, basically. And in my opinion, I think killing What's-His-Nuts at the end of Skyrim was just like killing Rufio at the beginning of Oblivion. And I felt like it was a proper send-off for that storyline in Skyrim and in Oblivion.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no, definitely. And like you were saying, it just was, everything about this was so unique. It was something that, like you were bringing up with Morrowind, the Dark Brotherhood is there. They are looming in the shadows. They are, part of this world, but you never truly get to get in the weeds with them in terms of, obviously to this level, and then again, doubling down on that in Skyrim, ESO, and more, and so forth, and I'm sure we'll see them eventually I would be shocked if we don't see some iteration of them or a similar, piece, area of the lore that maybe we haven't seen yet or whatnot, within Tamriel, wherever we're at, if we're in High Rock or whatever, in Elder Scrolls 6, I would be shocked if we don't have something that is akin to that, but just waking up to a note that just says, we know, and stuff like that it's you almost thought oh, there's something wrong with my game, or, oh, I triggered something that I shouldn't have, or, that was so unique to gaming at that point, that an open world game like this where, yeah, you can go anywhere, you can do whatever you want, you could live this other life for the most part, you're not used to having somebody interact with you in that way, or a character, do that, where you're waking up in the middle of the night just to somebody in a cloak with a dagger on you being, telling you, oh, you killed somebody. We know. And this is what's going to happen. And there's no real other way around it. You're going to at least talk to us, and we're going to at least, involve you in our plot to a degree and see where it goes. But it's crazy to me to see how long the legs are with this, that we saw it evolved on in Skyrim. And I agree. I really like the iteration of the Dark Brotherhood in Skyrim. I thought that was one of the better aspects of Skyrim. And I'm somebody who likes Skyrim, that I like it for what it is. I think Oblivion tends to be this better mesh of, traditional RPG mechanics like we saw still in Morrowind, and while still also having more of a smaller barrier to entry than, Oblivion, but not as much as Skyrim. But I did love, that was one of my favorite aspects of Skyrim, was the Dark Brotherhood quest. And especially, too, after, you could just keep going. Go to the Night Mother. She'll give you another quest. She'll give you another contract. You can just keep going and going and going. So to see that evolve and then move into ESO and have whole, full fucking, areas and aspects of that MMO be dedicated to that, it's mind-boggling. That there's a reason why this has stayed so heavy in the hearts of gamers for so long, and, obviously continued. That, like I said, I wouldn't be shocked if we see, I'd be shocked more so if we didn't see some aspect of the Dark Brotherhood, that part of the lore, carry over into, like I said, High Rock or wherever we go in Elder Scrolls 6. But so kind of pulling on something that I mentioned at the top of the show, And that's it. Oblivion seems to kind of be this black sheep of the franchise, specifically when it comes to modern entries of the franchise. Kind of you can take Arena and Daggerfall and whatnot out, but kind of focusing on Morrowind, Skyrim, and whatnot. Skyrim being the popular casual darling, like we talked about, with modern, peeled back mechanics and RPG elements, and Morrowind being that trailblazer, bringing the PC RPG experience to console with deep mechanics and whatnot that tend to reflect more on a focused group of RPG fans with traditional RPG mechanics and whatnot. But Oblivion kind of seems to blend the elements of both its predecessor and successor in a way that I don't think many people think about, in my opinion, with additional voice acting and less text-based dialogue and more cinematic interactions, and obviously to having, like I said, the Radiant AI and things like that, and also being able to just straight up like the mini game that involves people's opinions on you and being able to interact. You could bribe them and things like I think, while obviously didn't work to the best of its ability at all times, and maybe didn't necessarily hit the nail on the head at all points, it was unique, and it was something different that I think really kind of made that game stand out in a way that you can interact with so much more than a base game at that time. So, why do you think that, even though it was reviewed so well and loved by so many, and people say that, hey, this is one of the best games of all time, like we kind of read at the top of the show whenever I'm, giving this kind of blanket statement on it, with so many people loving this critically and commercially, why does it seem to kind of be forgotten as time moves on? Why is this the game that tends to be the less focused on game? I mean, we're just now getting an Oblivion expansion in ESO, when you probably would have thought that may have been a little early on that we would have saw something like that. Adam, why do you think this seems to be that game that in the series that kind of is outshone by, both its predecessor and successor?
I mean, everything that Oblivion did to kind of streamline what Morrowind was doing was done even further in Skyrim, right? And I think Skyrim is probably, of the three, the game with the most like broad appeal. Definitely more people played it, so it just got in front of more eyes, and it's probably more remembered, I guess. It's at least more present in the current consciousness. Morrowind stays weird in comparison to the two newer games. So I think the people who liked that game continue to like it for, its own reasons. Oblivion's really just kind of this weird middle child between the two, where it still had kind of an old school feel. It hadn't been fully streamlined yet, and yet it's partway there, I guess. It was an evolution, a stage in the Elder Scrolls evolution that was not lingered upon for very long. We have the series as it stands now, and we can look back at Morrowind or even further and remember to when it was much weirder, much more esoteric, and like asked more of you as a player, more of your time investment, more of your attention to actually get what was going on. I still think Oblivion is honestly probably best remembered right now for weird like NPC dialogue meme videos. Maybe that's just me.
Listen, there's nothing wrong with that, because absolutely there's one of my favorite YouTube accounts, and I'm sure all of you guys, one of my favorite channels, Bacon. I mean, the man, the myth, the legend, or I should say, whatever they whenever they upload, like, it's instant, because normally it is Oblivion just kind of fuck ups in there, just aspects of NPCs just breaking within, whatever goes wrong. There's bugs with how they interact with people. The instant, like, hello, hi, don't talk to me. Fine, leave me. How's your day? Like, just some of the interactions they have. Absolutely. 100%.
The ones where they're like, hello, bye.
Yeah. I hands down love the one that's the best is the Khajiit that tries to rob you, and you give him the money and you go and steal it, and he's just like, fine, take it, it's worthless to me. Like,
yeah.
What?
outside of Anvil,
yes.
When he's like, fine, take it, doesn't matter or doesn't mean anything to me anyway, or whatever.
Yeah, whenever he's literally 2 seconds before your coin or your life. It's like, well, clearly it means something to you. Like, holy hell, man. Mike, where do you think you stand with this? Why do you think though it was so, reviewed and loved so well by those who played it and everything, why do you think it's kind of fell by the wayside, in comparison to Skyrim and Morrowind, with where it finds this, where the dialogue and the zeitgeist kind of goes along with everything? Why do you think it's fell away from, everyone talking about it? Like, people still favor or talk about, with great love, Morrowind and, Skyrim, obviously, but why no dialogue around Oblivion as much?
Yeah, for me, where Oblivion kind of gets, I guess kind of gets its negative stigma, if that's the term. I'm not sure what term I would really like to use to describe it, but where Oblivion kind of gets its, I guess this negative connotation, I think, comes from people who, like Adam said, people who play Morrowind like Morrowind for a lot of different reasons. But I also think Oblivion's this game that's kind of on the cusp of technology. It was a next gen release for kind of like the 360 and PC. And I think it's just on the edge of like being this newer age game, but it still has a lot of the quirks and issues that older generation games had from that generation. And I think that's part of the reason why, it kind of gets its I guess not necessarily, I don't know how to really what term really makes the most sense when it comes to that. I would say, like, I think because of when it was released and the technology used for that game, I would say that is its biggest downfall, is just it's on the cusp of being a modern game, but I feel like it's close enough to an original Xbox and older game that like it kind of has the best of both worlds. And it's definitely like a little bit weirder for people who are younger to play that generation, because they remember the middle to end of Xbox 360. They don't remember the fears of the world. They don't remember those older games and how cheesy they really were. They could really benefit from spending some time playing Tony Hawk's Underground to like really, get to experience the weirdness that was there.
No, definitely. And I think you bring up a really interesting point too, because this game was a showpiece. Like, this was, at the time, I remember seeing videos on early YouTube, and like, what was the one video hosting site?
Vimeo?
Vimeo, that's it. Yeah, Vimeo, and like on NeoGAF forums and stuff like that. I remember seeing, recordings of the Xbox press conference at E3, and when they first, and also the press conference where they first kind of revealed the 360, and this being this tentpole, release, being this straight up, hey, this is a tech showcase for what we can do on this console. Every item in here is basically interactive. You can pick it up, take it with you. You could just hold down a button and, move it around like you're picking it up. Like, everything is interactable. There's the amount of, at the time, like lighting technology and texture technology and whatnot that they were able to bring with, the Gamebryo engine at that time. And, obviously looking back on now, that tool set's clearly dated, but they've been updating it for, the Elder Scrolls 6 and Starfield and whatnot, that now at this point, the creation engine is, I think, up to modern standards for probably what they would need to move it forward. Much more than I think the jump from Oblivion to Skyrim, and even Skyrim to Fallout 4. But at the time, Mike, you bring up a really interesting point, that this was a showpiece. This was shown as, hey, this is a reason to buy the 360. Not because, hey, it's launching a year before both next-gen consoles from our competitors, but you're going to be able to play experiences like this on your TV, on your couch, not on a high-end computer. No, you're going to be able to just sit down in front of a couch and play this. And I think, though, because of that era of gaming, like, now the 360, PS3 era of gaming becoming quote-unquote retro now, and being kind of almost to the point of, it's not obviously as much, but it's kind of where the PS2 and Xbox were really viewed as, well, these are huge jumps we're seeing right now in technology. This is huge, just incredible jumps in visual technology that we're seeing right now with graphics. To the jump being not as big at least not off the bat, between, late PS2, Xbox to, early PS3, 360, that jump not being as big, where I think it doesn't stand out as much to people now, where, you talk to a lot of people, they can go back and look and say, oh, I remember where, seeing the, first demo for Metal Gear Solid 2, or seeing that first demo for Kingdom Hearts or something, or Halo, and like seeing that and being like, whoa, this is mind blowing. Like that we're going from this and this, and look at the ring in the background. We're coming from, square faces to fully, detailed features and whatnot, where we didn't necessarily have that right off the bat. And I think that's where it almost gets into an uncanny valley look that we see with, Oblivion. And especially too, if you look at Skyrim and the much drastic art style change really that came with that, not to mention obviously being a Nordic feel to it, that it's, looking more, trying to be more focused on gray palettes and washed out colors and whatnot because of, the snow and things like that. But alone, you kind of set them up to each other. At the time, Morrowind, you look at Morrowind, it fit that era so well and was so advanced for that time. And while like I said, this was a tech showpiece, this was everything that they shown for Oblivion, it still didn't necessarily feel like this, looking back on it, if you look back on it now, it didn't seem like this big jump that I think we all thought it was then. And I thought it was, and people who actually see it and see the tech behind it are like, yeah, it was a big jump. It might not just be, in facial technology and things like that, but sure, it's rough around the edges, but there's a lot more depth beneath that. But I think that's where it kind of falls into that, like I said, uncanny valley-esque feature. But so, Mike, you kind of touched on this, and I want you and Adam are going to control the conversation on this one, because the DLC for Oblivion is actually a blind spot for me. Like, I've played, Knights of Nine and the Shivering Isles and stuff, but I never beat them. I never got super deep in them. I was always much more of a base game guy and played just the living hell out of the base game, but never really ventured too much into the DLC. So, like I said, for as much as I adore the game, that's kind of a blank spot for me. So, while I never played and finished them, they seem to have slid between the cracks compared to Morrowind and Skyrim's DLC, especially Skyrim's DLC. And that may just be because so many more people have played it. Skyrim comparatively, whenever we're talking about the reach that game had. But, do you think that's indicative of its quality? Or do you chalk that up more to, that era of console gaming where, console expansions and paid DLC still were a semi-newer concept outside of PC gaming? Like, we didn't see it as much. We had the Halo 2 map packs, were the famous one that so many people rushed out and bought. But this was the first time that we really started seeing, like, hey, Microsoft points are a thing, because you could go and digitally buy something and buy add-on content, where that was a very foreign idea still at the time, where that was slowly kind of entering that, where by the time Skyrim came out, season passes and add-ons and expansions, you can, that was kind of like, full force by that point. People were used to paying that and, buying an additional $30 on top of their $60 investment. So, Mike, I'm going to kind of start with you. And like I said, you and Adam are kind of run with this, because this is a blank spot for me, actually. Do you think that because of these two expansions falling, kind of in the cracks at this point, do you think that's because of their quality, or because, like I said, it's kind of a new concept at this point?
Oh, that's a really tough one. I think that it was kind of a blind spot for a lot of people, and I don't think people understood.
Because I know you liked the expansions.
Man. I mean, the Shivering Isles expansion was just incredible. I felt like I thought it was out of this world. I still think, even to this day, that quest line alone is probably pound for pound gives a run for the main quest line of the game itself, which is, I know, is probably high praise for people that like Oblivion, but if you haven't played the Shivering Isles, you really just don't get how excellent it really was. Without getting too much into story, because I don't want to take that much away from Adam, I'm sure Adam I'm actually curious to hear Adam go first, maybe just a little bit, because maybe it's just something that I just have like a bias towards, but I'd actually like to hear Adam talk about it a little bit before I go into my spiel about the Shivering Isles, because I don't really want to take that much steam away from him in case he feels as strongly as I do about it.
Sure. I don't remember everything about it, but the general impression of Shivering Isles was this was a chance for the developers to set aside the cheesy but still somewhat self-serious world of Cyrodiil and just dive into something completely absurd and off the wall. It had a similar kind of aesthetic feel to Morrowind. Like, Shivering Isles looks like Vardenfell just because of probably the giant mushroom trees. That's honestly probably the one signature marker. But in terms of like the design of the settlements, they were just more weird and it obeyed kind of like Alice in Wonderland type vibes. Like everything had a logic and an order to it, but that logic was like flipped upside down and so twisted and separate from reality. It was like every step you took was some other piece of head-scratching dialogue or like architecture, the designs on the new armor and weapons that you got, and the storyline was completely ridiculous, centering on Sheogorath, the Prince of Madness, another one of the Daedric princes, who is basically the Lord of the Shivering Isles. That's his domain. And because he is the Lord of Madness, the whole main questline of that island is going to be like just interesting, just strange, nonsensical, and fantastical. Very different tonally from the base game, but just like a fun romp.
To me, like I remember, I have a memory. I have a pretty good memory for certain things, and it's a blessing and a curse in other ways. But for me, what I remember most about the Shivering Isles is the fact that, and this is kind of spoiler, I guess, if you haven't played it yet, but I see the Shivering Isles as a game or as a part of the game that honestly really leaned into the fact that, as Adam was saying, you're talking about a Daedric prince, but also something to really think about is like, or at least that I remember specifically, is that he was kind of, that Daedric prince in particular was kind of like bipolar, and the island is split in half based on his two personalities. One being mania and the other being, is it mania and then kind of like the depressed side, dementia side of things. I guess I forget exactly what the exact term they use is, but mania is this happy-go-lucky, sunny place with like bright, vibrant colors, and then the other side of it is like someone who's bipolar who goes through depressive spells. And I thought that was such a unique way to really bring to life a really different experience. And for all of that to be said, like you can become the Prince of Mania or the Prince of the other,
it is
the dark
dementia.
And that was kind of the two things. Like you would either be the Prince of Mania or the Prince of Dementia, and there was someone in dementia that wanted to kill himself, and there were people in mania who like did drugs and like floated, I think, if I remember correctly. That could be like a stretch, but there was just so many different things. Like it was like yin and yang. It was like if something happened in mania that was positive, in dementia it was the exact opposite. And I thought that was such a cool take on the game, and I genuinely enjoyed my time with it because of, just like Adam said, it was wacky and cool, and it was cheesy, and it was cheese, and it was all kinds of different stuff that Prince said. But like, to me, I just genuinely looked at that as just such a unique, cool experience that if you missed out on it, if it's one of your blind spots, but you really do enjoy Oblivion, I really urge you to go back and play the Shivering Isles, because it really was a special experience in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's kind of one of those I've been talking on the show that, like, now we're kind of in this point where in terms of Xbox releases, that is, that there's going to kind of be not a lull, but we're going to kind of, hit a little for the next month or two, going to have some downtime from releases, which I'm going to go back and try to at least attempt some putting a little dent in my backlog, but we all know that as adult gamers, if you even want to factor that. But people with lives, wives, jobs, things like that, like, there's only a limited amount of time. But one of those is going back through and actually sitting down and playing through both of Oblivion's DLCs. I've done that with Skyrim. I've done that in part with Morrowind. But for some reason, as much as I hold Oblivion so highly, it's just one of those games for some reason. I don't know why, but just I never fully went through and beat either one of them. And the time I had with them, I loved them, but it's weird. Just it's one of those games that every time I start it up, I just focus on the main quest, or not the main quest, but the base game in general, but just because there's so much content there to begin with. But it is one that I want to go back to. And I've always had a problem with going and actually committing to DLC. I think the only one I really actually committed to this past generation where I was like, no, I for sure need to go through, sit down, play them. The ones that are actually have some, depth to them is the Witcher expansions, which I'm still working through. Blood and Wine, I need to go back and do that. But Heart of Stone as well, which I fucking adored, and Spider-Man PS4's 3 chapters of DLC, which were fantastic. But yeah, it's on the inevitable backlog list that I got to get to. But I've always wanted to. But guys, we kind of close off the conversation a little bit and round it out here. I kind of want to look to the future a little bit. So, while also really kind of sticking to the past, I guess. I think we all really had a different experience with Skyrim, or different experiences, I should say, with Skyrim since it launched almost fucking 10 years ago now at this point, which is crazy to think. But Oblivion was the one Elder Scrolls game we all seemed to kind of have that overlap with, that Venn diagram that I talked about at the top of the show, that it was so easy to, we all had different opinions on a lot of stuff, but this is that one that kind of overlapped. And really that's kind of what we talked about with the creation of the show, that, we play on everything. We all play on PC. Adam and I play on Switch and PS4. Mike plays, a lot more FPS games and, esports titles than we do, but Xbox was always the one Venn diagram platform that we all kind of played on at one point together and have so many intrinsically tied emotions to and memories to that kind of worked for us. So that kind of is the same for Elder Scrolls and specifically this entry. And, we talked a lot about our hopes and dreams for the next installment in the franchise when it drops in like 2030 or whatever. But let's get Starfield out first. We're already hyped about that enough, but let's get that out first. I'm one of those people. Let's make sure the horse is in front of the cart first off. But I want to focus on Oblivion specifically in regards to that in the future of this franchise. Adam, I kind of want to kick it to you first. What aspects of Oblivion would you like to see return or take at least inspiration from when Bethesda is designing and developing the Elder Scrolls 6? Like I said, could be anything really relating to leveling, character evolution, interactions with NPCs, environments, you name it. Any aspect of this game, or, it could be thematic ties or anything like that. What would you like to see, kind of find its way back into the series compared to, from Skyrim or even Morrowind? What from this game is something that you felt maybe Skyrim was missing that you were hoping to see, now you're hoping to see when the next installment inevitably comes out?
I feel like the camp was missing from Skyrim. Like Morrowind had kind of its like dark humor, and Oblivion was just incredibly, as we've been saying all along, campy and cheesy and not too self-serious. Like it presented itself to you as if all of this was just normal and you should take it seriously. But that is why it was funny, because of the absurd things that it had in it. I feel like Skyrim was just kind of self-serious and didn't have as much like weird, wacky content. So I would like to see that come back. I think Elder Scrolls does its best when it's having fun. It's just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks, and allowing weird side content to shine, not worrying too much about like the continuity of the world, or whether the main quest like takes you out of the experience of having to do like this is always going to be a conflict with Bethesda games. They're all going to have main quest lines, and like they're all going to have a ton of side content. And when those two are in conflict, you kind of get a game that's like, all right, I know you want me to go do this very urgent main quest line stuff, but the interesting stuff is over here, and that's like what most players are going to want to do.
You're being pulled in two directions when you probably shouldn't be.
Exactly. And Morrowind solved this by having the main quest line take breaks to tell you, yeah, you know what, you're probably too low level for this if you've just been mainlining the main quest. So, go off, do your own thing for a while, gain some renown and reputation, get some better gear, and level up.
Surprisingly, before you continue, just to kind of add to that, surprisingly, one of the aspects that I both love and hate at times, because it frustrates me at first because I'm like, oh, I just got to a really good part of the narrative and I want to see where it goes to. I want to keep going, but you're not higher level, go either grind or go and do these side contents. That's the one thing I really actually like about the newer Assassin's Creed model, with their more RPG, or I guess I should say action RPG, focus with the games. They're in each, sections of their sprawling map at this point that they have. Each one has a level, bracket that you can kind of fall into. And, some of them will be 45 to 50. You got to be at least there to really kind of thrive or at least feel comfortable in. And, hey, the next quest line, the recommended level, and The Witcher also does this too, which I adored, and especially The Witcher with the side content it had, that it forced me to go and actually see these side stories, learn these characters that are outside of the, outside the worn path. Like, it made me go and trek off and find these experiences that, necessarily most, some players may not find, where it forced me to kind of get more ingrained in the world. And yeah, at times it felt a little handholdy and forcey, but, at the end of the day, when I look back on those experiences, I think more fondly of the game because I got to feel more lived in and more immersed within that world, that narrative, and more, and I think with games like that, with RPGs specifically, and especially open world RPGs, that's one of the pulls of those. It's, hey, I want to be immersed. I want to live this other life. That's the allure of these games, is you're quote unquote living another life. You could do whatever and all this stuff. Like, that's what brings you into those games. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry, but it just, you kind of pulled on a thread that I was like, that clicks. That makes sense.
Yeah. And like, if you didn't do that in Morrowind, it had level checks in there to kind of stop your forward progress from mainlining the main quest. There's like a balding dude on a bridge right before the first Dwemer ruin that you go into for the main quest. And if you just run straight there, straight out of Saint Denis, he'll kick your ass. Like, the game really expects you to not be level 1 doing that stuff. And like, you could get around it if you wanted to. The game is not going to like literally prevent you from entering that dungeon unless you are level 2 or higher. It's not like hard coded into the game, but if you're already looking for workarounds for the challenges that the game puts in front of you, then you're playing as intended.
I do remember, like, did we one time in a playthrough, Adam, before we really knew much about the game, did we accidentally run into that guy and get owned by him a couple of times?
Probably.
Because we could just like buff, like, we're like, look at this shirtless bald asshole, and then he just kept killing us. Like, literally, he's like balding and in like, he like has like the priest from Oblivion's hair where it's like a crown. And he's like shirtless, and he just kicks the shit out of you over and over again.
Definitely. He was easy to stumble into as well, because he's just past the fort that's right outside of Balmora.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, to bring it back around, I think I would like to see future Elder Scrolls games really bring back that harmony and honestly the focus on side content versus the main quest line. And let it be weird, let it be experimental. Tell some strange stories and subvert our expectations. I don't like it when I'm playing a game and I can guess where it's going to go, and then it goes exactly there, It makes me feel smart for a minute because I'm like, oh yeah, I see what you're doing there. But like, it's not giving me anything. It's not enriching me in any way. So
Mhm.
I guess not every game has to be a fucking dissertation, but that would be cool to see.
I'm tired of the cookie cutter shit. So I'm right there with you. I want something that pulls me in a couple different directions and isn't necessarily. And I feel like Bethesda has kind of stuck to their laurels a little bit with that. I think they've gotten a little, with the structure of their games, a little complacent. I mean, I still love their games and I still play them. I still enjoyed Fallout 4 and Skyrim and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I felt like you were kind of a little rushed more so, and more kind of like you were saying, you're pulled in two different directions when I want to be, encouraged to go and explore. I want somebody, I don't want to necessarily be, oh, well, you have to go do this. Yeah, that's there if you want, but you got to go do this and you need to go do this and yada, yada. Like, I want to feel that kind of just, yeah, here's the keys to the kingdom, go. Mike, what do you think?
I definitely like the points that Adam made. That was probably like my number one go-to. And he brought up a good point about Skyrim that I do want to just touch on really briefly before finishing answering your question.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the campiness is something that I definitely missed from Skyrim. And you know what? Like, I've been kind of thinking about since Fallout 4 came out, like, what was the deal with Fallout 4? Why did I just really not like it quite as much as the other games? And I think that in a nutshell is exactly what I was missing. Like, I feel like Fallout 4 was missing a lot of that camp, like, because, like, let's face it, I liked Fallout 3. I liked it probably more than New Vegas because you could blow up that town at the beginning. You could you got to shoot him in the head is probably my favorite Bethesda quest of all time. And not just for Dukov saying my ball is slapping off a cherry's ass, but because of Dukov saying my ball is slapping off a cherry's ass. And, for me, it's like I missed that camp in a lot of different ways. But all things considered, what I could really like from the new Elder Scrolls, I felt like Skyrim was a bit more of a hit because it was a little bit more believable and realistic. And I know people are going to say, dude, it had fucking flying dragons and dragon shouts. Yes, it had that. But I feel like the all-around surroundings of the game was much more believable than fucking Oblivion gates. Like, yeah, dragons, yeah, that's pretty far-fetched. But, like, you weren't being teleported to different realms as much. And I felt like it was a more believable area than like the high European fantasy. But I think with the new Elder Scrolls, what I'm really looking for, just point blank, is like to get back to the campiness, to get back to the story driven. And like Adam said, I felt like Skyrim was very predictable. I felt like Fallout 4 is very predictable. And I'm hoping to God and I'm praying that Elder Scrolls 6 isn't that, because I feel like Adam put it perfectly. I don't feel like I can add much more depth to the discussion because I don't feel like diminishing Adam's points because he made such good ones, because I feel like he appropriately, encompassed exactly how I felt about it. And it's something that, like, it's one of those, like, lightning strike moments where it's like, oh my God, I didn't even think of that until now. You know what I mean? Now him saying all that makes so much sense. Like, it's exactly how I feel.
Mm-hmm. No, and I think
I'm not trying to cop out and like get out of answering. I promise. It's
you rat bastard! Like, you fucking fell for it. No,
I'm a rat catcher. Like I'm Tybalt, but no. I wish I could find a YouTube clip of that. I'm so sad I can't. But
Tybalt, you rat catcher.
But like, I just like I don't feel like I can say anything else that hasn't been said at this point.
I think I don't think you're wrong, because I think that is a point that a lot of people would bring up. Where,
like, cheesing Benny in New Vegas, like, there's a lot in those Fallout games that people might not really think like is that cheesy, but it really is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, taking Jeannie Mae Crawford out in front of the dragon that looks like Reptar and having Boone shoot her head off, like shit like that. It's just so Bethesda, and they just got away from it, unfortunately. It's like they got flat with their storytelling.
No, definitely. And I think that's what a lot of people would say. Because, too, you look at, and realistically, with obviously New Vegas being developed by Obsidian, but looking at how they took that direction and kept really not only the heart of what Bethesda game, open world Bethesda games were, while also, invoking their own RPG, heartstrings that they had, and, really the, incredible character development and narrative development that they're known for with RPGs. You look at that and you look at where Fallout 4 went and where Skyrim went. And it's understandable why they went that direction, because they realized, hey, we're gaining momentum. We're getting to the point now where, especially too, you look at Fallout 3 and how much success that had after Oblivion, and knowing that, hey, we're going to have a much bigger fan base, but we could have an even bigger one. We can obviously make more money. And especially too, with Bethesda being, and really ZeniMax Media being technically an indie developer, if you want to look at it that way, not obviously on the same, obviously, pay scale and, money going in and whatnot, but not being still not at that point being an EA level or a Take-Two or Ubisoft or anything like that, but being this almost double A still to a degree, but really getting into that full swing of, no, we're one of the large scale players, and, we have this unique opportunity to bring as much more people into our fold with how we make this game and how we, put this game out there. So I understand why they made some of the decisions with Skyrim, because they knew, hey, we're going to be going in, we want to bring in as many people to RPGs and our games as possible. If that means scaling some things back, making some things a little more streamlined and whatnot, that may be the cost of that. And especially, too, I think we saw that with Fallout 4. And I know Adam and I are a little more on the positive side with Fallout 4 with the experiences we've had with it, though I still have my complaints with it being even a little more streamlined than, Skyrim was. But I personally think that I'd like to see, not necessarily, like you're saying, the campiness that's brought back to it, but I want more open-ended aspects of this game, or whenever we get into, future installments with Elder Scrolls. And even too, I mean, I know we're talking about Oblivion, but from what we're hearing about Starfield, like we talked about last week on the show, it seems like it's going to be more of a No Man's Sky experience and more open-ended and more, kind of tackle anything you want, go anywhere you want, more so than, it'll have its narrative pool, like Adam brought up, all Bethesda games do. They have a formula at this point with all Bethesda game studios developed games. They have a main quest line and side content, but at this point now, if you want to, it could be viewed as a linear game for the most part. If you want to just stick to the main quest line, you could do that. And it doesn't necessarily put as much emphasis on the side content, which most players who are playing these games and who have been fans of these games for so long in these franchises, that's what they want to see. So I'd like to see more of an emphasis put on that. I'd like to see more of an emphasis put on really open-ended. I don't necessarily want A to B. I want, I can get to A to B, but at the same time, too, I'm much more encouraged to go from A to B, but instead go A to C to G to E, then back to A, to then go to Q, to then go to B. Like, I want more.
What about F?
Yeah, and F. Well, F's in the chat, too. But point being, like, I want more. I want more diversity when it comes to what I'm doing within that game. I want more of this open-ended feeling. And I know Oblivion was kind of that, meet in the middle type of thing between Morrowind and Skyrim, but I always felt much more encouraged to kind of just go and do whatever. I want that almost, and it's more so outside of Oblivion at this point where I make this reference, but I kind of want that Breath of the Wild moment with Elder Scrolls 6, where they kind of pull back to, they kind of pull more back to their roots, where when, Breath of the Wild was being developed, famously, the team talked about, we've looked at the original Zelda and said, we want to go back to that formula of, you're just dropped in this world, figure it out. There's not that much hand-holding. Yeah, there's some, obviously environmental storytelling or environmental nods that push you along right at the beginning, and yeah, then you get set up with, hey, here's this end goal, and you could technically go run there and do that right now if you want, but you're missing out on everything. You're missing out on And it makes it evident. And I kind of want that. And I thought Oblivion always did that well, where, yeah, maybe right off the bat, you can go and, you know, you can fast travel to Wayland Priory, but at the same time, you could also go and, you know, hey, there's a small bandit encampment right across the river from where you are. And you can go down there and you could go into the small dungeon that's there. Like, instantly you're presented with choice. And I want that a little bit more than I found in Skyrim and Fallout 4, especially. So I want to see that return that I thought Oblivion did pretty well. That was, you know, and like I said, I think Oblivion's known more for being a middleman for a lot of things, but I think that's a positive thing. But to me, that was always one of my favorite things about that, where while it still was, if you want to play a linear experience, you can, but you don't necessarily have to. There are things right there. It's that moment of, you see that mountain over there, you can go to it, and you can go to it right away. I want that back with my Elder Scrolls experience. If that means peeling back the cinematic approach a little bit, I'm okay with that. I want more of this lived-in experience that I feel with Morrowind, what I feel with Oblivion and Fallout 3. Like, I want that. And I, you know, especially now too with Bethesda being under Microsoft's umbrella, and so the same with, you know, Obsidian and, you know, all the other talented teams that are there now creating RPGs. Like, that's who there's a chance to now kind of work and bounce stuff off each other and share technology and share ideas, you know, and that's what we've really seen PlayStation have and Sony have that success with their first party studios, because they're so open about talking of how other studios will go visit other studios while they're working on projects and network and throw ideas off of each other. And they encourage that, and they encourage the, you know, sharing technology and parts of their engines and working with other studios to find a common goal to bring the brand up together. And, you know, I really think that could only help moving forward with the Elder Scrolls, and specifically the sixth one. But I really would like to see that. I want to see more open-endedness when it comes to, I don't want to see cookie cutter. I want the wheel kind of broken at this point with Bethesda. And I still love their games, and I still love their, you know, newer entries, but there's a part of me that does feel much more, I feel like I'm going to get much more of a similar experience when I play Skyrim and Fallout 4 than when I play Morrowind or Oblivion or Fallout 3. You know, I feel like my experience is going to differ a bit each time I play those, more so than the latter two. But guys, I think that's going to do it for our big 100th special, where we talked about Oblivion all fucking night, and I loved every second of it. I'm finally glad we got to do that. So guys, why don't you tell people where they can find you on the interwebs? Adam, let's kick it to you first. Where can people find you, talk about all the stuff we talked about, specifically Oblivion, that I'm sure people can sound off their incorrect opinions, obviously, because that's how opinions work. You know, if mine are right, yours are wrong. Where can people find you on the interwebs to talk about everything we talked about today?
You can find me on the Bird website at AC_Marshy. That's twitter.com/AC_MARSHY.
Nice. And Mike, where can people find you on them interwebs to talk about all things we talked about with Oblivion today?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at TOYSXLDIER, or you can find me on Twitch at MP_Toy Soldier. And I do want to stop and just thank Adam for coming back onto the show. I know, you know, when we started the show a long time ago, the show has taken a lot of transformations on, and without him, you know, we kind of changed it up a little bit, and we found our way. But you know, I'm so thankful that he was able to come back for our 100th show and celebrate it with probably all three of our Mount Rushmore games.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we all love the game so much, and I was so glad to chat it up with him and kind of turn back the clock a little bit on the show.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Oh, absolutely. There's a reason why on each episode of the show you're still in, obviously, the video version, you know, being credited and whatnot. It's because you're a founding member of the show, and you always will be, and you know the door is always open to come back. And as always, I'm your host, Travis White, aka Traveless, on most internet platforms, including at Traveless_ on Twitter. That's TRAVLESS_. You can find me streaming time to time on twitch.tv/Traveless_, same as Twitter. And if you want to play some video games with me over on Xbox Live, you can do so with just regular old Traveless. It's TRAVLESS. And this, ladies and gentlemen, has been your newest episode, your 100th episode of the Gamecast, your weekly go-to podcast for all things Xbox Game Pass, and PC gaming, including news, rumors, and conversation around them damn good video games. You can catch new episodes of the show when they drop each and every Friday morning on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and all other major podcast services. So be sure to subscribe to us, rate us, review us, all that jazz, whole rigmarole I tell you every week wherever you get a podcast at, and follow us on Twitter at GPGC Podcast. Stay up to date with everything regarding the show, video games like, and our dope giveaways. And, of course, I want to say thank you to every single person who has ever listened to the show. 100 episodes. 100 fucking episodes, man. It's funny, I was thinking about it earlier this week that, like, when we first started the show, I kind of made a bet to myself. I was like, listen, give it a month, commit to doing, weekly, like, getting everything out on time. It almost like a gym regimen. Like, it's the first month's the hardest, but commit to a month, then go from there and build upon that. And if you like what you're doing, keep going and keep doing it. No one's forcing you to do it, yada, yada. But luckily the show's grown and we got more listeners and, greater social following and this and that. And, we've gotten to do a lot of really cool things and talk about a lot of really cool things and talk to a lot of really cool people too. But, it's crazy I was thinking about that. I'm like, it's crazy to see how we committed on that and we kind of doubled down on it and just said, fuck it. Like, when we first were talking about doing the show, it was, hey, let's, we talk about making content, we talk about doing these things, we talk about making a podcast about games and being that we want it to be like you're sitting in the basement with your buddies playing games on a Friday night, eating pizza, drinking Dr. Pepper type of thing. Like, we want you to be that fourth person, third person, whatever in the, when we're recording with us and like we said, sitting in, having that experience that we all had as kids. We want that. And that's what the show has always kind of tried to emulate. But, we kind of just said, fuck it. You know what? We're always going to talk about doing it. Let's just do it. Screw it. Just fucking do it. It's going to be bad, but you know what? Let's do it. And we committed to that. And for 100 straight weeks, we've gotten the same show out at the same time. A lot of late nights sometimes and a lot of schedules moved around, but it's because we love doing the show and we love each and every one of you who have listened to the show. So I just want to say, on behalf of myself, Mike, Adam, Mike Collins, anyone who's ever been on the show, thank you for listening. Thank you so much for giving us a chance, us being a part of your commute, your lives, whenever you listen to this at some point during the week, every week. I just want to say sincerely thank you so much and cheers to another 100 episodes, hopefully. And we're not going anywhere. We're keeping the train rolling. We're going to be 101 next week, and that's all that matters. So once again,
I was going to say, man, that heartfelt message was so sweet. I want to echo it. Like, God damn, it felt like you were pulling the plug on this bitch.
Yeah, I was going to say, what if I was just like, fuck it, we're done.
Just ended it.
Yeah, we're keeping it we got to keep it 100 with you. No, literally, we're keeping it at 100 with you. We're not going any farther than, no, I'm kidding. We will be back next week with episode 101 and probably back next week with your normally scheduled program, but we obviously want to make this one special. So, like I said, thank you everyone so much for tuning in, listening to us, and being a part of our growing community, as I say every week. Game on, wash your hands, listen to the doctors, Black Lives Matter, and we will see you next week.